My name is John Fields, and I'm the Lydia Cheney and Jim Sokol Endowed Director of AEIVA. And so for those of you who are joining us for the first time, AEIVA is a visual arts center located on the campus of the University of Alabama at Birmingham. We present 8 to 10 exhibitions a year, highlighting a mix of regionally, nationally, and internationally acclaimed artists focused almost exclusively on contemporary art. We serve a diverse audience of university faculty, staff, and students, artists, museum patrons, and donors, while simultaneously striving to keep our exhibitions directly relevant and engaging to our surrounding Birmingham communities. We help represent the visual arts at UAB to local and regional institutions, but also the national and international art community. Since 2014, AEIVA has been featured in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, The Nation, Raw Vision Magazine, PBS Canvas, among others. And we're proud that all of our exhibition and the majority of our related educational programming are free and open to the public. And so since the quarantine, since literally the end of March, AEIVA has been hosting a series of weekly live Zoom events featuring discussions and interviews with artists, curators, galleries, and collectors from all over the country, with guests from many corners of the globe at this point, honestly. But tonight's guest is actually making his second virtual appearance with us tonight. There's some joke in there about how long we've been in quarantine, that it's okay to have the same artist back for a second time at this point. But Lucas BLALOCK is an artist that we've been following at AEIVA almost since our inception, and we've always wanted to do a show with Lucas, and we're really thrilled that that is now happening, even though it's under the circumstances they are. But it's really cool that we get to have the type of event we're having tonight. And so Lucas BLALOCK is an artist currently living and working in New York City, using both traditional and modern photographic processes. BLALOCK exploits the inherent artificiality of photography to prevent constructed representations that reveal deeper truths about our own existence. And so Lucas's work has been featured in numerous exhibitions all over the world, including the United States, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Russia, Japan, Italy, the United Kingdom, and many, many more. Many of you saw Lucas's work 2 years ago in the 2019 Whitney Biennale. His work resides in some of the most prestigious museum collections in the country, including the Whitney Museum of Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Museum of Modern Art, the Hammer Museum, and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, just to name a few. And so tonight, Lucas is going to just sort of talk to us a little bit about his career, his exhibition here at AEIVA. I'm broadcasting from the gallery solo tonight, and so when Lucas gets to the show, I will sort of give you a little bit of a virtual walkthrough as he's talking. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and just hand it over to Lucas.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you, John, for such a great introduction. So I had an idea to kind of change up, especially because this is my second virtual talk at AEIVA in the last few months. I thought I would try to bring some new things to the table and kind of talk about my work through exhibition making, because this is kind of on the occasion of making an exhibition, so I thought that was a good place to start. And in some ways, I'm just going to leave a lot of breadcrumbs, which goes kind of hand in hand with the way we thought about making this exhibition. So I feel like there'll probably be questions. It's going to be kind of open-ended, but yeah, I hope I hope it works. It's a brand new talk, so let's see how it goes. John, how do I share my screen? Can I just do it directly? Oh yeah, I can.
Got it.
All right. And then cool. So y'all have a slideshow, is that correct?
We do.
Okay, good. All right. So I guess I should try to introduce the work a little bit to begin with. I come out of a background. When I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a writer. And by the time I was about halfway through college, I kind of discovered photography. I'd been interested in film, and photography was kind of, laying in wait, kind of. And so I picked it up in a much more sort of traditional way. And when I was younger, I was kind of working, I I studied with Stephen Shore, who's a very kind of influential American landscape photographer, who made most of his work, or most of his best known work, in the 1970s. And so I kind of started from this kind of position, and was really interested also, just in my own life, in movies. And so I was kind of thinking against these as sort of poles. Like I was thinking about the way that Stephen was making pictures of the American space. He talks about exploring the medium while also exploring the kind of cultural space around him. This is something that's kind of stuck to me, although my exploration of the medium changed over time. And then I was thinking about people like Cindy Sherman and Jeff Wall, and in this kind of much more cinematic way of making pictures. And this kind of lasted for some period of time. I worked in this vein well out of undergrad and through a good deal of my 20s. And it wasn't until later that I sort of saw another path, or like another potential. And this picture is this is a picture called Deck Prism from 2008. And this is kind of one of the earliest pictures that kind of showed this change from this kind of more cinematic, stylized, I don't know, like, cinematic would be the word, kind of form, to this much more sort of painterly approach. And this picture sort of sets up the start of the trajectory I'm going to share this evening. So it's like, so that early work won't get any attention this time. It'll kind of start from here and go basically up until the present. And so what I want to talk about is really about making exhibitions. So about how, as a photographer, photographs in some ways are sort of more native, maybe is a good word, to the book space than they are to the exhibition space. And as a photographer, I think I was always really excited by artists, by non-photographic artists, and the kinds of things that they were doing in exhibition. And I feel like for me, I saw an opportunity to kind of try to draw some of this kind of non-photographic logic. Photographic shows tend to be just sort of a presentation of works. And I kind of wanted to have more fun with it than that, and wanted to draw some of this other energy into photography. And I think that this is something that I do in a lot of different ways. I mean, in a way, you could see this picture and say that it's kind of drawing painting energy into photography, which I think is a perfectly accurate way to think about it. And so I was, I'm really curious about using the photographic medium, this tool we have to look out at the world, and think about the kinds of opacities in sort of games and interventions that I can kind of build up in that space. So you're not only seeing what you're seeing out there, in this case, a studio picture of bananas and cherries, but you're also kind of aware of the mechanism of looking through it, through the camera, the way that photography looks at or like captures or really transforms the world. So that's sort of the preamble. Let's see. How's this? And so from there, I think I just want to talk about a group of exhibitions that have kind of allowed me to sort of like have this thinking. Like in some ways, a photograph is a really short form to think in. It's like they're really fast. Like I feel like they're made quickly. I think we look at them really, really quickly. And so exhibitions and books are sort of an opportunity to have a more complicated thought. And this has felt really, I don't know, it's central to my sort of feeling as an artist. Like I really like, as much as I can put in any individual image, there's a kind of like buildup of language over a group of images that is really, I think, the thing I'm chasing more fundamentally. So this is not a good intro picture to this show. So this is a show. So basically, I'm going to just go through a group of exhibitions coming up to the present, starting in 2013. And this is the first one I'm going to talk about. This is a show I did at the New York Gallery Ramekin Crucible in 2013, which is really like sort of this moment of transition for me. I'd gone to graduate school in 2011, gotten out in 13, and was really, I don't know, I think this was the moment when exhibition making really became like part of my practice. I think before then I was kind of putting books on walls. And I think by 13 I was really trying to think against the space as a sort of continuation of the logic of the show. So what's going on in the show, what this map is all about, although it's not the best first slide for the show, is that basically there are two shows. So this irregular shape here is Ramekin. And we built inside of it the largest regular rectangle that would fit in the space. And so this is a drywall, sort of regular rectangle. This is looking in through the front door into this kind of regularized space. And so the initial idea was to kind of like formalize this really sort of, I don't know, like this very found sort of rough architecture to create to sort of undermine an expectation that people who were familiar with the space and have gone there a lot expected a certain quality from it, and it was kind of in the nature of the show, or in the desire for the show to sort of push against that and create another kind of experience. And so it was just this very sort of minimal, very sort of clean white box, really quite white box show. And these are the works that were in it. This is a group of small works called Edge of Town. And then it's the guitar player on the left, and one of the picture for Marx on the right, which are both in the show in Birmingham currently. And so this is also, it's also true that this is like in looking backwards, this is sort of like not only the start of this of exhibition of certain kind of exhibition making for me, but also it sort of has become like this this jumping off point for thinking about doing surveys and exhibitions since. So what is true of this show, though, is that we not only hung this sort of regular rectangle, but we also hung a show on the existing architecture. And so there was this way in which this show in the regular space canceled out this show in the other space. And for me, this was kind of exciting because this was sort of something that was happening in my pictures, right? So if you look at the picture on the right, picture from Mark, it's an image, a still life image of a piece of plywood. It's a plywood tabletop that had a bunch of objects that at one point belonged to a roommate of mine. And what's happened in the picture is that I've used the clone stamp, which is a tool in Photoshop that allows you to clone part of the image and sort of transfer it to another place in the image to sort of like cover up or erase all of that content. Let's see if yeah, here we go. And so I like the idea that there was a space in the exhibition that could kind of continue the logic that was going on in the pictures. And this really became a sort of jumping off point for me. And every time I've done an exhibition since, not all of them have been so tricky or so architectural, but it's always kind of on my mind what this opportunity might bring up. So this is a photograph of the back of the space. That's that picture. It's called Ball and Chain Music. And so Ramekin also has like a big plate glass window in the front. And so when you looked into the gallery through the big plate glass window, you saw the back of this wall. And this picture was kind of hung in a place you could see it. So you got this kind of double sense of being kind of like boxed out of something and in another way kind of let in. So this show is in 13. And I'm just going to kind of go forward historically. So I was offered an exhibition the next year in St. Louis at a great space that's unfortunately no longer there, called White Flag Projects, run by this curator named Matt Strauss. And Matt invited me to do an exhibition, and I was like, oh, what's a fun, like, or I don't know, I was looking for a sort of opportunity in that. During that year, I'd been making these photographs of hot dogs. Again, one is in the AEIVA show. And I think that, you know, yeah, starting with that Ramekin show, which is called Id, Ed, Ad, Odd, and coming up through these other exhibitions, sort of tell the story of the AEIVA show in another way. So this show was very formal in a way, you know. It's like big pictures hung on walls in really simple frames. But I kind of loved this idea that it was a show. It felt like a kind of bad painting show, you know. It was like these sort of like these pictures that have ambition to be marks, to be mark making, to be to kind of have the physicality and sort of surface of painting, and are obviously it really failing at doing so. But you know, there are also these, you know, there are also still life pictures, and could relate to someone like Irving Penn, or I mean Andy Warhol. But really thinking about the way that this subject, or any subject for me, might do a sort of double duty, might perform more than one role at once. And the hot dog was a really sort of powerful tool in that. Because for me, I was thinking initially about this Photoshop brush mark. If you think back to Picture of Mark, this kind of hard, dumb line that you can make in Photoshop. And I'll bring it up again. But the brush it's almost like a kind of cartoon brush. And I really felt when I first started to photograph the hot dogs that they were sort of like the embodiment of this cartoon brush. And I was really interested in that. But I was also very aware that they sort of did this, again, sort of double duty as parts of the body, and as sort of, I don't know, it's almost like a sort of like an analogous object to a photograph. You know, a hot dog is not really a sausage. It's kind of it's a 20th century industrial recreation of a sausage. It's really like a picture, a synthetic sausage that's made more. Yeah, it's in some ways more a surface than substance. So this is just running through that group of pictures. And something I talked a lot about the last time I spoke with y'all was about this kind of love affair my work has had with painting for a long time, and that I've had with painting. And you know, it's I don't know, these works I think are really kind of core and central to that situation. All right, so so we're jumping a year, 2 years now. So this is again in New York, at Ramekin Crucible. It's a gallery I showed for a very long time, the same gallery from the first show. And this was an amazing opportunity. This was an opportunity to put up an exhibition in an old boiler room underneath a condo complex on the Lower East Side. And it was this kind of wild labyrinth to get into the place, and you kind of had to be led into the space. But there was something kind of like, I don't know, there's something grand about the situation when you finally got there. It felt, I don't know, it felt like it kind of carried its own history in a really interesting way. And it was really, you know, really beautiful. The proportions of the space were really beautiful. And so this was another kind of challenge, you know. It was like okay, so yeah, what kind of show can we do in this space? So this exhibition was called Low Comedy. And really is a kind of like group of games that are really specifically playing with ideas of presence and absence in photography, and thinking through these technologies that are sort of acting as foils. And I'll get into that in a second. So this is the show. One sort of notable thing about this show is these works that are hung here by being stuck into the ground. was really sort of, it's something that's continued on in my work and that you'll see again. But it started here as a real sort of necessity. There was just too much junk on these walls to be able to hang the pictures on the walls. And so this was an opportunity to sort of like, to bring them off and to sort of think about them in sculptural space without sort of like giving up the ask that you look at them like pictures. Which is something I've always been, you know, I feel like I'm really a picture making artist fundamentally. And so as much as I'm interested in sculptural ideas in and around photography, I'm sort of disinclined to sort of put the sort of pictorial content secondary to an object. And this was a really nice sort of like step, like mid-step between those things. This is some of the work. What I was talking about foils. I was thinking a lot at the time about the way that tools get learned. You know, like the way that that technologies, particularly earlier technologies, kind of all have like a really sort of simple map to the body. Like the newspaper is about the size of someone's arms spread apart. Cigarette is an obvious technology. You know, a knife. This picture is called switchboard. All of these things were sort of these I don't know, these really intuitive bodily, both in scale and in use, ways of thinking about, you know, creating some sort of novelty or new experience in the world. And I was really interested in the way that that sort of was contradicted by the tools I was using, by Photoshop, by the computer, in that there isn't such a learning it with your body. There's only like a very kind of sort of cerebral kind of learning. And I think for the most part, it gives a very kind of cerebral picture. And so I was really interested in trying to push against that and to get the works to give you a kind of a real bodily feeling. And so I'm kind of using these sort of other things that ask of the body to sort of set up a situation to get the digital to sort of call forth this bodiness. So this one is called Covered Piano, but it's also kind of it's like a cartoon body under a blanket on a table. So just some more shows in the exhibition. Sorry, someone's really quite loud outside. This is a picture called Another Shadow. One of these two shadows has been made in the computer. This is more monkey. This is the cop. You can see on the left-hand side of the image, this kind of shadow figure that's actually made out of a slightly altered shadow of two automobiles. But I was thinking a lot about, yeah, about the stone, like the cobble is another kind of tool, you know, like is a tool of resistance or this kind of thing. And just again, like trying to think these two worlds that can feel so far apart back into each other. All right, so sorry, this one's quite low res. I don't know how it looks on y'all's screen. So this is an exhibition I did in Zurich. This is now 2018, I believe. So just kind of coming up towards the present. And this is a show called Ketchup is a Vegetable, which is a sort of it's a borrowing of an idea from the Reagan White House, where there was a kind of scandal around trying to get very unhealthy things like pizza classified as vegetables in school lunches. And so I was thinking about this kind of idea of I don't know, this moment of a return to very conservative politics in the United States. And the kinds of kind of activity that can often underlie that, and thinking about this sort of this kind of, it's like there's still quite a bit of humor in the show, but it's the humor in dealing with the sort of environment of the time is getting somewhat darker. These works also, you see the stands again, all had works, second works attached to the back of them is like kind of like marginalia or footnotes or I don't know, like those Amazon like you know, what is it? You know, you might also like things. I was kind of interested in the connective tissue. Like again, I was talking earlier about, you know, the way a single photograph can feel sort of stingy in its ability to sort of, or in its totalness. You know, it's they really like my desire to sort of build a language or to make things repeat and amplify is something I was kind of playing with this this sort of exhibition decision. And it's not only the works on the floor, but all of the works on the wall, if you take them off the wall, also have these photographs on the back. So these are some of the works from this show. And so to speak a little bit to what John was saying earlier, you know, it's like there is a sense that the tools I'm using, not only Photoshop, but really photography itself at this point, are really native to a sort of digital space. And one of the things that I've been really interested in my work is kind of drawing them back out into a physical space with us. Because I do think that there are other kinds of thinking and other kinds of feeling we can do as it gets sort of like drawn back off the screen that aren't so possible looking at things on a monitor. This is a picture called The Occupants. This one ended up being quite important and sort of like germinating a whole body of work, which I think I will. I'll kind of swing around to. But really, this is a hotel room in Switzerland, and with these, somewhat self-conscious digital sort of characters. You know, it's a kind of an allegory of this idea that within, you know, it used to be that in a photograph, what you were really looking at was a representation of the material space of the world. And that's certainly a great deal of still what photography is doing for us. But there's also, at this point, a sort of cohabitation between that worldly space and this kind of much more plastic, much less behaved space of the digital. And so I was really interested in kind of thinking about one as kind of occupying the other. Oh, again. And, you know, my work also is constantly coming up with new questions. You know, it's like thinking about whether I could take this way that I was working kind of out onto the street. You know, like photography is kind of full of conventions and genres, and I'm always sort of looking for an opportunity to make a picture that's kind of stepping outside of the spaces that I've been sort of mining for the most part. So I'm going to show a couple more exhibitions. This is the last gallery show I'm going to show. This is something that went up just before the pandemic started. It actually kind of got cut short by the lockdown in Brussels. This is a show I made called Insoluble Pancakes. That is really like it's five. There are 5 of them in the exhibition. These are the 5 images that were in the show. But they're of a number of 11 self-portraits that are all kind of using the same situation as a way to think about a certain kind of embodiment and flexibility and digitalness and all these kinds of things. And so this opportunity to do, again, like the hot dogs, maybe a show with a very sort of tight edit and a sort of tight thought was something I was excited about. All right, so I kind of want to quickly talk about 3 last shows, and I won't be too long about it. I know Zoom is a hard medium, where we're sort of coming up to our show at AEIVA. that are sort of looking back. You know, like so in 2019, I was given the opportunity to do an exhibition that was curated by Jamila James at the ICA in Los Angeles. And I called it an enormous ore. And this idea of an enormous ore, it came to me through this Constance de Jong novel called Modern Love. And I kind of misappropriated her, its meaning. In the novel, there's a kind of fantastical moment of a person stirring an enormous cup of tea with this giant ore. But what I was interested in is this idea of a tool that's somehow out of scale with the human. You know, so an enormous ore in some ways is a thing that could do a lot of work, and in another way, it's a totally useless item. You know, it's like a thing that doesn't do work at all because there's no way to be the ores person. And so I think that this idea of a sort of massive potential in a tool that we can't quite figure out how to use is something that I was really thinking about as a sort of good analogy for image culture, digital image culture. And so, these are a little out of order, but that's okay. So this is the first picture, also in our exhibition, is the guitar player. And thank you, Fred and Ellen, for loaning it to both exhibitions. But this picture is the earliest picture in the ICA show. And it's really like, it was also kind of the earliest picture in my talk today. It's really a kind of like fulcrum or like turning point from one style of working in one set of constraints and sort of a turn into a new one. But I think that in some ways, like the real starting point for this show is these two pictures. And so let me show you a few pictures of the show, and I'll come back to this. So it was a sort of bay of this contemporary art space as an exhibition, and we built just for the show this sort of elongated stud wall. And again, it's like this idea, like with that first Ramekin show, of kind of putting the back forward, you know, which is like Photoshop is considered kind of a back end software. It's like it's something that in most cases people want to disappear by the time you see the final image. And so because I've kind of used it the other way, I've sort of been interested in sort of metaphor and analogy that functions to bring other things forward. So this is the exhibition. So all I really want to say about it is that it was really interesting to be given an opportunity to do something that was kind of like a survey, you know, to look back. And initially, I started in a much more traditional way, I think. But as it sort of developed, I really got interested in like, oh well, how do I create polls in my work, and like what kind of battery can I make out of this group of pictures? And for me, that kind of came out of these two pictures, which in some way are quite similar, and in some way are almost total opposites. I mean, this is kind of a picture of a machine. It's a picture of mark making that sits on top of the image. It's a picture made out in the world. Whereas this one is a sort of studio portrait. It's made by cutting through. It's of a person. And so I think I was thinking about these tensions, about animism, about about the digital, about all this kind of stuff, and these kind of like set the sort of like endpoints for this exhibition. And as we populated it, I think what was happening was we were just really kind of thinking about language. You know, like it was like, oh well, this picture has a certain sympathy with this one, or a color relationship, or there's a sort of shared way to get from one to the next. And I think that sense of language, of a thing kind of hanging together in an almost ineffable way is something that I keep sort of feeling myself pursue. So yeah. So again, these are just some of the pictures from this show. A hot dog. This is a picture called The House Guest, which is of a dog, which is also in the AEIVA show. This one's called Perfect Kiwis, also in our show. But I think for me, like thinking about photography is thinking about sort of like an everyday language that I'm trying to think of ways to sort of repurpose or amplify or get it to do things that are sort of unexpected, and really to give a more sort of amplified relationship to the things that I'm trying to picture. And I think that that sense of a sort of of connective tissue across a group, I think really sort of really supports that way of that desire. All right, so last show before I talk about this one for a little bit. This is a show I did in Germany at the Museum Kurhaus in Kleve, Germany, which is way in the west. And I'm letting this amazing candle that I bought at a secondhand store in Miami kind of stand in, just because I think it's a beautiful thing. But it was a huge show. It was a show. It was like an 8-gallery show, and so this was just sort of after doing the show in LA. And the LA show became a kind of like a compression of about 5 years of thinking. So when I started thinking about those two pictures, they opened up a sort of like tight group of work that all sort of stuck together. And I had this show in Germany coming right after, and I kind of ended up building the German show sort of around the LA show. So there was a piece of the German show that came before. So there were 2 rooms of hot dog works. And then there was a huge part of the German show that came after. All of these new works on the right, which use 3D technologies, among other things, were one of the sort of really new, sort of like further points that I really wanted to take the work, especially after having just done this sort of like concise thinking about it for the show in LA. So I'm just gonna go through this a little bit. This is one of those works I was speaking about using 3D technology. It's called 3 Deaths. This is a different kind of 3D. This is a sort of like hall of sculpture, if you will, that's all made out of photographs. This is a room that was upstairs in the show, which these things are like 5 meters tall, I think, the tallest. So they're really huge and dwarfing, and really have a very different feel. They almost don't feel like photographs at this scale. There's another one. And then there were other rooms that were much more traditional. This was a big picture, small room problem. And then this is a room of props, which is something I'd never attempted before. So these are a few of the works from the show in Germany. All right, so our show. So there's a twisting road. So the exhibition that's opening just now in Birmingham is called Lucas BLALOCK in Telephone. And and this is this idea of telephone as like a children's game, you know, where you like whisper one ear into the next, and sort of it goes around the room, and as it goes around the room, it inevitably changes. And it changes because people don't understand, and it changes because people want it to change. And I think I was really interested in that idea of a sort of body, like this, again, it's like a kind of like a certain kind of like place where technology and the body really touch, you know? And so I was thinking about it sort of along with an enormous oar. That second show, the German show, was called Or, which was sort of like, it was like ellipses or. So to kind of like bookend it with the show in LA. And I feel like this exhibition is still kind of furthering and continuing that logic. And so I don't want to kind of over talk about it. Like, I feel like these shows are, like, a lot of the pleasure and joy in them is in discovery. But as you sort of move around the room, this work called Right Shoe, you know, which is beside this work, which has got a very long title. It's called Some Sleepers something diphthong, but it's my notes have disappeared from me here, so I can't see what its full title is. But you can kind of feel this kind of slippage between pictures, and this happens in all sorts of serial ways throughout the show. I mean, here's another one talking about that very rough, you know, clone stamped line. You know, it turns into these hot dogs for me, but I feel like any viewer might see it in a different way. It might be this kind of like fleshy pink it turns into the hot dogs, and I feel like yeah, I don't know. I'm hesitant to say too much about my own reading, because in some ways I really feel like I'm just my work's first viewer. You know, like I make it, but my experience of it after that is really sort of like investigative in the same way that I feel I often look at other people's work. So I'm going to say one last thing, which is that I have a new exhibition opening in New York next month, which is at Eva Prestonhuber Gallery. It's going to be called Florida 1989. And this the title comes from one of the works in the show, but also comes from an event from my own biography. That is when I was 10 years old. I lost a thumb at Disney World, and there was a subsequent surgery where they removed my big toe and put it on my hand. And I feel like this is a sort of in place of the thumb. And this is a kind of like, it's just like another narrative vein. You know, it's like another way of considering all these replacements and double duties and all these kinds of things that have been going on in my work for a long time. This show is going to kind of like, I don't know, explore that as a sort of formal content, I guess. So this work is called Reverse Titanic, Hell is in the Air, which is a photograph of beer koozies, but it's also a picture of two sort of decapitated fish heads making out on the deck of a boat. And I feel like, yeah, it's probably a great place to stop.
Thank you, Lucas. Let's see, we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand or enter it in the chat. I'll start just while people think of something they want
Aaron
to.
has he raised his hand. So
Okay.
Go ahead, go for it.
Hey, Lucas, I really enjoyed hearing your talk and the work. I also really enjoyed how you light your photos. Like, it gives a sense of being very flat, but also having depth at the same time. I was curious if you consider the lighting to a point to where, you know, you might be doing a series where you're doing a lot of clone stamping or subtracting. Do you consider how that method of moving around the objects will change the composition because of the lighting that you use on it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, man, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think I've found it's, I mean, everything kind of becomes a rule for some period of time and then it changes, you know? But I think for the most part, like I really want the Photoshop work to feel like it's happening to the object more than it's happening to the image. Like I'm kind of think about the Photoshop work as almost like a kind of like sculptural work that's kind of happening in the picture. And so the light is often really direct, because it's the easiest lie to tell. Like, so you as a viewer in the gallery, when you're standing in front of a picture that's lit in a really frontal way, it can feel like you're in the same space. Whereas if the more elaborate the light in the picture, the less you feel like you're kind of sharing space with that place. And so I think that this is probably the reason they got so direct. And I, you know, every time I kind of lean too hard on a crutch of some sort, I'm like, can I kick that? So it's always kind of up for grabs. But yeah, I think it's a great question.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, Aaron, that was a really, really good question. Let's see. Anybody else?
I don't know if it's necessarily a question from me more than a comment. It's something like about your work. There are some images that, like the last image you landed on with the two fish, you know, decap, like that one makes me giggle. So there is like this overall arching theme of humor within your work that I find really interesting. It's also a dark sense of humor in a lot of ways. And so that's something that I really enjoy about your work. If you want to say anything, you can, but I just kind of wanted to say that because there are things that just absolutely make me giggle. And it's okay. Like, I mean, you know, everybody, it's subjective. That's what makes art so wonderful. But
I feel like humor is really important to me. You know, like I mean, I think it's been important to me as an artist, just like in staying engaged, you know, with making something over a long period of time. Like making myself laugh is kind of it's like part of the pleasure.
yeah.
But I also think that, like, you know, for some of the things I've been interested in, like some of the relationships that have been kind of core to my work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to laugh is to really, like, it's like to think with your body. You know, you literally shake when you laugh. Like it's like you really have to become, like, you become present in a way that is really. I think there's something it kind of wakes up your nervous system, and I feel like for me that's like it's really not so far from like. I mean, both the darkness in the work and also like a lot of the sort of more conceptual ideas in the work. They're all kind of nested very close together.
Yeah.
Lucas, I know we've joked a lot about the hot dog, like Tina and I, like being really obsessed with the hot dog photos, but I've really been thinking about like why, because I am genuinely drawn to this image in particular, and as I'm sort of looking around the room, I came to this realization, and I felt really stupid for not realizing it earlier, but of course it's like, at least on the surface, the only image in the show that doesn't appear to have been like digitally manipulated in any way. And I think you kind of started to answer my question when you were talking about the hot dogs a minute ago, but I'm curious if you could elaborate. I mean, is it, because what I'm seeing, it is sort of like an analog clone tool, and that these are like extruded on an assembly line through a machine. But I'm curious if there's anything else you can sort of talk about, like why these are just sort of their own thing and sort of have escaped the Photoshop and the other digital processes.
I mean, so it may be true that it's the only one in the room that it is not Photoshop, but that is not necessarily representative. You know, like there have always been quite a few pictures that, like, if you look through a book of mine, there are plenty of pictures that have Photoshop moves in them, and then quite a few that don't. So I think it's not sort of one or the other, but it's really like for me, it's like, so I'm trying to make a picture with this tool, which is basically the camera, you know, and I use this kind of old 4x5 sort of bellowsy camera, you know, and then I scan the film, and then and then there's the computer. And so these two components together make up my tool, basically, you know, and so I guess I feel like there are a bunch of different answers in that tool. And I'm really just trying to be sensitive to my subject, I mean, it's funny to talk about sensitivity with the hot dogs, but it's true that it's like I'm just trying to kind of get the most out of them. And the hot dogs were weirder without Photoshop. Like they really like, they're kind of like dumb flat-footedness. Just it did more work that way. So they stayed. I mean, there certainly are files in my computer of photoshopped hot dogs. They were just better the other way. But I also think it gets to this idea of Americana, which is also all over the work. And I don't know where I can go with that, but it's another point of hot dogs.
That makes total sense. Let's see, do we have anyone else have any questions?
Can you see me waving?
No, who is that?
I'm sorry. Go for it.
Yeah, Elise, go for it.
Hi. Hello. It's Elise Ferguson. That was a total treat. Amazing. I loved every second of it.
Thanks so much for coming.
I know. I found it somewhere listed. I was like, ooh, I'm coming. So I just found it so sort of thrilling and beautiful to listen to you talk about this concept of making an exhibition. And it almost has this sort of like, like a spiritual practice or like a lifestyle choice. It has this like larger context to it. So, and I feel like I approach my work similarly. Like I approach an exhibition as like an organism, or I approach it as like a sentence, and each, like how you would break up a sentence and, like in high school, I forget what they called it.
Diagramming, yeah.
Diagramming a sentence. So I feel like when I make a show, I'm diagramming a sentence. And so I feel like when you were talking about this making of an exhibition versus having a show, making work, showing work, like you're making this like organism. And so, but then you have this other kind of category of these two shows that are like giant surveys, which seem like another kind of beast altogether. Because then you have to just like kind of go back to the books on walls a little bit. But I'm just wondering, like when you're like putting together a show, like the Florida show, like as you're making the work, like how do you? So you got to make the work, but then you have to make the exhibition. So how do you, as you're marching towards that exhibition that you're creating, like do you make a lot of work with like this concept in mind?
It's an extremely inefficient process. It's really like. Yeah, it's like the way I work. It's how can I answer that? And like, it's a great question, Elise. I feel like, my process is like, I really work picture to picture, and oftentimes even the content is pretty sort of sub-conceptual. Like I'm not sort of like, there's not a big plan. Oftentimes I'm kind of like making this mountain of work and then kind of trying to dig the show like subtractively out of it. I'm kind of like extracting the show at the end. And so I think, I don't know. It's I actually wish I could do it in a more straightforward way, but I haven't figured it out. Even the hot dogs didn't feel straightforward. So it's, I don't know. But yeah, it's, I think that sense of the one and the many of the organism you're talking about is like right on. And like, I do think that even though, I feel like I'm kind of like, in order for the pictures to work, I really have to look like at the ground, and like, in order to figure out the exhibition, I have to look up. And so I think that it's just like a trade, at some point in the process, I like look down for long enough and then I have to sort out what I did.
It's beautiful. I know. You're just an amazing artist. I love it. I love it all. Yay. Well, thanks.
Cool. Great to see you.
Well, I think we're about at the end of our hour. So just want to one more time thank you, Lucas, for joining us for round 2.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Lucas.
Woo!
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with Art Circle Live with Asterio Segura Mora, a Cuban artist, and Fabiola Ortiz, who is a collector that many of you know. And Asterio is going to be joining us from Florida. He just happens to be in the States right now, so we're really excited that he'll be able to actually hop on the Zoom with us. And I'll also, just to kind of, we have been talking about and thinking about Lucas's work a lot over the last several months. And if you would like to keep doing that, our partners over at Art Play, they're actually going to host a class this spring. So I think the class will start in March, but it's UAB's sort of film theory guru out of the Honors College, Gareth Jones. He's created an entire class about self-reflexive cinema. And so Lucas sort of personally selected one of the films that we're going to watch. And so we're just going to kind of watch these films, and then the class will basically be a series of discussions, and we'll get on and we'll talk about it. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, I encourage you to participate in that. And so you can just find Art Play on their on Facebook, or just hit us up, and we can send you the link to register.
Christina just put it in
there it goes.
Chat.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
So again, thanks everyone. It's great to see you again. I know we've been gone for a few weeks, but we are back, and we are looking forward to Shona McAndrew next month. And yeah, so we'll see you all again very soon.
Thank you.